All right. So, yes, it is a mind training class. Someone is asking online. So, yes, Jennifer, mind training like the rays of the sun. And we'll start a session with making a brief mandala offering as a token for requesting teachings. And then, all right. So, sorry, shut up. It is a mind training class. All right. So, just a second, opening the prayers. And then the prayers refuse me. Actually, maybe they're open. Just a second. All right. So Sheriff Geshe dubbed you as a Nomse. Are you up for it? All right. Just a second. Holy moly, what's happening here? All right. Sanje Chandam Sobi Chonam La Chanchu Badu Dami Kelsoji Dage Chushin Gibe Sonangi Dola Benchi Sange Robasho Sanje Chandam Sobi Chonam La Chanchu Badu Dami Kelsoji Dage Chushin Gibe Sonangi Dola Benchi Sange Robasho Sanje Chandan Soki Chanam La Chanchu Badu Dami Kelsoji Dage Chishegi Ben Sonangi Dola Benchi Sange Dobasho. Kangi Chulgeni Tawat Responsible Kodam Jala Chance. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Geshe.
Chuki. Is it Chuki?
Yes.
Hi, Chuki.
Good morning, Geshe.
What's up, Chuki?
I'm on ice.
You're on ice. All right.
Sorry. That sounds bad, doesn't it?
That's good to know. I'm calling the police.
Oops. Oops.
Was that another Sanyi mission with the Yap? And Lojong Chigolas.
So anyway, it's Sunday morning, and on Sunday mornings we're looking at the mind training text.
There is the Lojong Nimbuti Samba Sambucheti. Samba Sambucheti is the Lojong Nimbu Samba Sambu.
Anyway, as we're dealing with mind training, what we're actually getting at is a kind-hearted mind, developing a kind-hearted mind.
The Samba Sambu kind of Chigo is long. Samba Sambu kind of Chigo is long. And it's Sambu and Nimbaki, Sam Sambu and Sam Nimbaki. Kabardita Shingudas, T. Shini, Sam Sambu Chival, Gensen Kariyova, and Sambang Nimba Chivalia, and it's Kian Kariyova. The Tinji told the sound down to one, and it was on Chile, Pependo yourselves.
And as we're looking at ways for developing a kind-hearted state of mind or a good state of mind, then first off, we want to be clear about what's the difference between good and bad in that sense. And also, what's the benefit? What's the purpose in developing a good heart, a good state of mind? And what's wrong with a negative state of mind? So those are the things that we need to be clear about as we take up trainings of the mind.
that's the job kind of chagga mission of and not the number Sam Granshin, yes, hours. Sam Granshin, the Kunchi your market, and San Yerode said, young Sam P. Chalaya, and Sam member, and Sam Marola, Jimmy Pango, and the deed Songodas, the deed Sogi, the Sogi covered the shoot. Kitchen is that is, and no Jones in sub China, and the Zupi and the kitchen is that is.
So we say that the nature of the mind is clear light. We say that since the nature of the mind is clear light, it is suitable to become Buddha. It is possible for us to become Buddhas because the nature of the mind is clear light, and yet at the same time we say that there are some states of mind in our minds which are crude, which are negative states of mind, but they can be eliminated. So putting these two together, the recognition that we do have some crude, ill-mannered states of mind, and yet the nature of the mind is clear light, and therefore it is suitable to become Buddha. This is an important point to understand.
Is the Tambudelia Sem Granshins long, Sem Granshin down, Sem Nibudelia. Kevasol Chigos this. Sam Granshins long, Kuranshins long, June shower maimba, Genji Toki, Yotan shower maimba, Krang Ranshin, Umacho, still, Sam Granshin, Umati, Karis Landi, Kyon and Geo Manisage. Once you Sam Granshin, Umati, and Kyon and Geo Manis, and Kyon the Geo Manis.
So first off, when we look at the nature of our own mind, we need to distinguish between the mind and the nature of the mind. They are not the same. So the nature of the mind is not something that is created. It is not contrived. It's not that the nature of the mind arises and depends upon conditions such as faulty conditions. It's not that the nature of the mind is mixed with faults. It is not mixed with faulty states. The nature of the mind is not reliant upon faulty conditions.
And Sam Granshin and he came to church of mind, can't do the shadow of mind by the same with curiosity, and it came towards the choice of a Tandalaya, the Sikran shoot with the Potuia, Martinia, and that the Kali was in the same ranch, he can chai of Maris Long, same with Chadi, and it lowered to choice of image. What did the Kogor is rough?
So the nature of the mind is without faults. It is without faults, and yet the mind is sometimes together with faults. So the nature of the mind is uncontrived in the sense that it is not created. It is not created by faulty states, and yet the mind is sometimes together with faults. So it might seem to be complicated. You might be thinking, what are we getting at? What's the meaning that we're getting out of this discussion? Well, to put it shortly, what it means is that it is true that the mind sometimes has faults, but those faults are adventitious. They are adventitious in that they are not ingrained within the nature of the mind.
That's it. Is the same with the lower to be chosen. You can't to be chosen in the not. And call the jail. And 다 유진지 또 아니 종교였나 유진지 또기 아니 주기요 봐 유진지 또기 아니 매우 소기요지 된 거였어요.
What it means is that since those stains are adventitious, those faults in our minds are adventitious, it means that they're created by cause and conditions. And since they are created by cause and conditions, it opens an opportunity for a change. We can fix them. We can fix the mind. We can make amendments to the point in which we eliminate all faults from our own mind. We can do that because those faults are not ingrained within the nature of the mind. They are adventitious.
만들어 갖대나 강아지 연구라서 강아지 다 깨깨리 라 셈마기와 우리 셈 shum바당 셈마기와 아니 연구여라 디야 아니 다 깨리스 디 로르도 조자바이 유진직을 땐 조자바이 이마이자 디 메버소에 탑지여바이 연구에서 갖대나 먼저 마기와 shum바당 야지야당 용식이스 영야 대자인이 따지 아니 도도 메비 소리 상담바이나 소소소 마키바 칠레지 마도 편도 싸우니 요마스 디 도도 메바지 대우연이 싸우니 차그메반자 디 도야 탑치 요바디 아서다 시트바도 인자 디 도야 탑라야 상담바이나 가드이는 소소래야 아니 치 뽑발래야지 샘 슈비까라이나 아니 지금 슈버 도좀 샘에 뽑아내야지 야시야당 연구였어요.
We do have difficulties. We do experience problems. It seems that at any given time, there's something difficult or some problem that we experience, big or small. We might become unhappy, even to the point in which we become depressed. We might become discouraged and so forth. Those things do happen to all of us. And these are what we call faults in the mind, but they are created by cause and conditions, and therefore they can be changed. There is a way of fixing it or correcting our mind with states such as unhappiness, discouragement, and so forth, because those states of mind are adventitious. They depend upon cause and conditions, and therefore our situation can change. So if we do nothing about it and we allow our mind to remain depressed, unhappy, discouraged, and so forth, there's a danger that it will just grow stronger and stronger. And there's no point in remaining in that state. It gives us no benefit. There's a way of recovering from such states of mind. There's a way of fixing such states of mind. So, for example, at times in which we get utterly discouraged, when we lose heart, we can remind ourselves that such state of mind is adventitious. It depends upon cause and conditions. And therefore, there is an avenue of change here.
아니 지 소소에 냠마부스 로직슈 지토레야 상반데 수수지 칸 무튼 상반 아니 어두 시온 간지 소소스 마 네비소르치 차도버스 이제 디자원님다 안 상디 땅주 네버레스 디 마스타치 그 프로블럼이 좀 된데야 이시치 대바치는 지바이나 자원인 말로 송다스라 다니엘님 내가 세디 በት 내려나는 독슈치 간지 소소소소 때문에 아니 경험적인기 가서 가긴 치슈디 다니엘님 내가 찾아봤어 이 아니 어디 자원인 가서 인지가래야 영어가래야 뭐 인지를 도는 상상 이따 처음에 상당이었어 상상 상도 인증 땅 거였어.
So we do become discouraged sometimes to the point in which we become despondent in thinking that there is nothing whatsoever that I can do about my situation. And it seems that on top of the problem that is already there, a state of mind that becomes more discouraged is adding more pain, more suffering to our current state of mind. In that sense, we compound our own suffering. We compound that mental state of being discouraged. So if you see yourself as Buddhist, if you think that I am a follower of the Buddha, then one thing that you can remind yourself is that this way of thinking is not right at all, because this is what the Buddha called laziness of discouragement, or laziness of looking down on yourself and thinking that there's no way I can work with that situation. There's nothing that I can do about this situation. Is a type of laziness. And there are ways to recover from that type of laziness. This is not a state of mind that we want to take up. So that's something that we ought to remind ourselves.
진짜 이 상황로 간지 아니 유견지를 된 총과에 유견지 도에 여바 야치자다 말이야. 도비 탑레야 전고에디 남이다 준준은 손대들이 주스여데 메이터에 상황 주야 매버 지금 바이나 주야 매버에 텔레 슈슈지 마키버 치니 아니 샘데 치니 펜도 매버다 무여로 기지 주기 여바나 주비 탑레들에 만벼 치지 아니 소소 심데데바나 미스 촐라데로스로 어 딘지 상 양양 담바이노 아니 야시야도 샘네 켄고스로.
So at such times when you become discouraged, think to yourself, the sense of discouragement is created by cause and conditions, and therefore I can recover from that. There's a way to recover. Just like Shantideva said in his Guide to Bodhisattva Way of Life in chapter number 6, where he says that if there's something that you can do about the situation, if it can be remedied, why be unhappy? And if there's nothing that you can do about the situation, what's the point of being unhappy? So think about it. When you're discouraged, if there's something that you can do about it, since it depends upon causes and conditions, what's the point in despondency?
That's all big and the same grandson you should never. And if tomorrow was said, the younger tap to the one without danger said to us, the deep of this some down to an the Lojong Kayolayuki, Lojong Lea, Penguins is rock.
So then think about it. Think about the way that we started off today in reminding ourselves that the nature of the mind is clear light, that there are no faults which are ingrained within the nature of the mind. Those faults are adventitious. If you think about it, then you can also link it up with the teachings of the Buddha pertaining to dependent origination, that whatever exists, arises or exists in dependence on and in relation to others. And when you think about it and take it to heart, this is what you're doing is you're practicing mind training. This is an actual mind training practice.
Yeah, that did some there is Capital number subject to the channels.
So, you can get it.
Yeah. Oh, did it then? Here's that one. The Daran, the Kazis and Vilaya, so Captain understand. Nanzulaya, Ganga Yunguri, and it same day Yunguri, Tamandigo Yunguri, Kazana Nanzu Chick, Zamban in the TV Tutti, and Ingman not to say. Ingman not do none, Ingman not do. You can teach the Levanza, and if Kanga Yobards. The deep Kanga, the Sanjatan, the deep Kanga Javanza, and the Macham de to Tselchin, Tony, and Nansu Cheddar, and Zambal in Delia, and some Shendler, and Gamongi Ambachinchi, Pevchini, and Manzulayata, Lojong Tangat, Tembaris, rock.
So having said that, we're going to go back to the text and pick up from the point that we left off in the previous session. So as we're looking at Namkhapa's mind training like the rays of the sun, just a second, I just fixed. Mind training like the rays of the sun, we, in the previous session, looked at the beginning of the text. So we looked at the section that explains the historical account of these teachings and how these teachings came to be. we looked at the lineage, and then we started to look at the beginning of the text, which explains the greatness of the teachings. And drawing from the 7-point mind training, in the verse that says, you should understand the significance of these instructions as like a diamond, a sun, and a medicinal tree. The stem of the 5 generations will then be transformed into the path to the fully awakened state. So we started to look at this section. And today we're going to pick up on this paragraph that says, Buddha Shakyamuni descended, sorry, I'll put it on for those at home, just a second. It says, Buddha Shakyamuni descended particularly at a time when the 5 generations were at their worst, and beings' thoughts were preoccupied by disturbing emotions and their actions unwholesome, accumulating only negativity. So here the author of the text says that particularly thinking of our current situation, we're experiencing problems and difficulties. It seems that sometimes no matter what we do, things do not work out for us. So considering our time as the time of the 5 degeneration, and the time of the 5 degeneration means that it goes without saying that you will have problems, difficulties, things do not work out for you. But the Buddha, the Bhagavan, who showed up in this world and have taught the Dharma with an attitude of loving concern and great concern for living beings, have taught means for training one's mind. So when you do feel that the world is going from bad to worse, there are sets of instructions that you can still put to use instructions on training your mind.
데리다 닝망남도 닝망 그 같이 독슈 그 난좀 교수로 그러니까 강사님마 아니 따와님마 아니 님님마 최님은 계시죠.
만디야 세 타와 녀몽
세님 강사 야 어딘지 딱 하르슬람 디 간지 단디는 이거다 따라래 대산님만 되게 님만 줘 심전남 상규 님문이메 자규 랭엔다 빅버소기메 라마도 시행칸라야 내가 중치 콜로키 지수이란치 라마도 비신스는 내가 중세 차도 끊는 시발라 수세기 누가 있으니 저비 제는 바시 제비 심진이 지빈이 컴컴 감들스 까부 가위 까부가 가위 이 같이 추송 댄송 탈론 템바탄 펄lum지 좀체 신감 시엔도 셰 나불가 가위 메타 마마이 두바체는 투단 뉴바게티 치리야 지게이 컴스트라메시바 파트 동 캬벌 템비 보르슈디 같이 추칭이 냠비에 대칭 담비 추드바노 고파츠 온네 파체다 케치지 깽이 지비 감들 춘드다가 만들나 총고토 둘라스 춘디 고르슈니 데모 깽이 남부치 본 조스 저원 규디 대답에 담비 추드비 가기 춘긴 소신나 케바티나스
So this 5 degeneration means that those 5 features that signify that the time that we're living in is time of degeneration. So we have different features such as, for example, degeneration in terms of views, degenerations in terms of afflictive emotions, degeneration in terms of one's lifespan, degeneration of living beings, degeneration of time. So here the author of the text referred to those degeneration and how they manifest in our society. It says, Buddha Shakyamuni descended particularly at a time where the 5 degenerations were at the worst and beings' thoughts were preoccupied by disturbing emotions and their actions unwholesome, accumulating only negativities, which is a sign of these times of degeneration. When misfortune falls upon others, they perversely rejoice and are jealous when hearing of others' well-being, which gives rise to the pain in their hearts. Cyclic existence is filled. Can you see that on the screen, or is it too small? Small. Try to kind of, in a second, I'll try to make it larger. So cyclic existence is filled with those whose actions of body, speech, and mind are employed only in harming others. So at this time, the protectors of the doctrine, the gods and the nagas who support right actions, have gone to other worlds to support the doctrine, and 4 classes of Buddha's disciples. On the other hand, all hostile human and non-human beings who favor wrong actions increase their activities, creating various calamities, particularly against those who follow the theory and the practice of the holy doctrine or the Dhamma. It is therefore all the more important that such people implement the teachings explained in this text. Otherwise, they will be unable to continue the practice of the doctrine.
Kanshi di nang song de tere tene samgyu, tringyu, chigyu, tsangma da chik ani nimu tu sama do meba ani chik ishenla ya ani kaso da magawa chakdo tene marab chede tintin rikdi da ani da sem kyen re islamandi the disease the same curious song zambala dangan to kill and go asra the kill them by no and kyun ba di ha kono ani kyun di doctor chi go asra kyun di sha sha ba no nasa di chi ba le do drive mo do never answer the dire kyun mun zim to ne ani kyun doctor chi di ani lo jong ni tan ji shi de di cha go asra the disease chi to ba nda ke ba nis and one time
So the section is quite clear in pointing out that we do have different mental faults, such as, for example, developing animosity between one another, a sense of dislike, jealousy, and so forth. These states of mind are faulty states of mind. They are faults of the mind. So we do need to accept them as being faulty states of mind. And if you do accept them as faulty states of mind, then you think that this is what I need to deal with. I need to recover, to overcome those faulty states of mind. In some sense, you can say that they're like sickness. If you have a certain condition, physical sickness going on, and you just let it be without applying a treatment, it can only get worse rather than improving on its own accord. So also here, when we think of our mental traits or mental faults, so if we are affected by animosity, sense of dislike between ourselves and others, jealousy, anger, and so forth, we need to apply a treatment to them.
This one, King Toxicure, you know, never change. Tell us that this King Toxicure, and it's a and Sambang member, and never saw to me. Sambang in my game, that didn't by the touch, one time and me Yahusano, Delase was this. And never young is Delase was this. Mother, and you want to some the Shaman the journey, and Maron with you, and Chachi Kanjan Chedavina, Kari in 7 now, Tandala, and Marab Chadas. Never make each others. You know, we Shaman the Kurdians.
As this text says, on the other hand, all hostile human and non-human beings who favor wrong actions increase their activities, creating various calamities, particularly against those who follow the theory and the practice of the Holy Dhamma. It is therefore all the more important that such people implement the teachings explained in this text. Otherwise, they will be unable to continue the practice. If they enter the gateway of this practice, if we enter the gateway of the practice, we'll be able to transform unfavorable into favorable circumstances. This is the action of a wise man, which means that this practice of mind training is taking adverse circumstances, adverse conditions, and turning them into factors which are favorable to us. And this is the practice that we follow here. We do not allow those negative circumstances to take over, because if we do allow negative states of mind to take over, they will form us into being a negative person, negative human being. If we transform them into favorable conditions, which means that we do not allow those unfavorable circumstances to take over, you can become a better person. So this is the type of practice that we take up here in our practice of mind training, not allowing negative emotions and negative states of mind to take over, but to use some adverse conditions into factors that will help you to become a better person, a better human being. In reading through the remaining of this section, it says, "This teachings provides the power to defeat all adversities and overcome all obstacles on the path. If we travel in this way, the way of development and meditation, we can see our bodies as blissful pure land. Then unfavorable circumstances, whether internal or external, will neither cause misery nor upset the mind, but will be transformed into factors conducive to happiness. This is known as the undisturbed worldly realm, and even a great heap of fire-like afflictions, whether physical or mental, will not move or disturb the mind. This is called the city of the source of happiness, and it is the point of attaining the single-pointed meditation capable of easily following all doctrines. A little practice at this time, when the 5 degenerations arise and we are overwhelmed by both internal and external impediments, will be more swiftly effective than accumulating merits for eons in a pure land. Such is a special method for transforming bad times into good ones, and explaining an explanation of which follows below." So this is when we begin with the actual part of the text, the explanation of the teaching. So in looking at the actual body of the text, the main teaching here consists of 2 parts. Here we begin with contemplation of the preliminary teachings. That's the first part of the main body of the text. The second one will deal with the actual instructions for developing the awakening mind, the mind of enlightenment.
만주 땡기 다 믹스 쳐디 원즈 투사레스
When the section begins with contemplation of the preliminary teachings, the Tibetan heading, more precisely, is speaking of giving a consideration to this basic Dhamma, which is a preliminary part of the teaching. So this basic Dhamma, the basis of the Dhamma, is referring to the recognition of our current circumstance in having attained a life or a body with freedoms and richnesses. So first of all, we recognize the physical support that we have. So from a Buddhist perspective, the body that we have is called a physical support. What it supports is the mind. Then looking at different physical supports that you can have, different bodies that you can have, and how well they can support consciousness that can be developed. What we are looking at is whether we've attained a body, whether we have a body that supports the development of a smart or intelligent consciousness. Or if we were to be born in other states of existence, like as an animal, would that body, that physical support, would be conducive in terms of developing our mind?
Dira dapena ani sachi korana tambo hundo tawo la jesong des hundo la la ya kharesa nanzu luden khabar change yimba di ani nuanzinge so tereses ta luden khabar change la khabar do phasa jide de ani khabar do phaba yimba di When we
look at mind training like the rays of the sun, we recognize that it is a text that explains another text, the 7-point mind training. So this is a commentary to the 7-point mind training. And in the 7-point mind training, it says first training the preliminaries. That is the first thing that we do. So we then training those preliminaries in recognizing that we have this special or distinguished physical support. And when we say special or distinguished, it needs to be considered in relation to something else, in relation to other bodies or other circumstances. We do have this special feature in this current body, in this current life.
Dirita and didn't ya Nandu Ludin di Ludin Shanlatin and draw the two shivers. I don't draw Shanlatin Nandu Ludi Luyagaj Resha said. Di Lagoras, the in the mean Vitoria, Shimjuchin, Nutsulaya, Yaga Rendum, Diadi, the Kishishuredas.
So we said that the body that we have, this physical support in comparison with other life forms is a better physical support. It is a better body. But rather than just saying that, we need to give it a thought, to ask ourselves, is it correct or is it incorrect? Is it really the case that this body that we have now, considering other options, other bodies that we could have had, is it really better than other states of existence?
That within Yara said, and it's Sobda down, and dog down, and indeed which I saw in Maras, on the Sobda di Kola Magonata, Sobda cancel to your mother, and it's also a chamber to chew that kid to be down in bed, and it when you are as the Nasu did never Serena, the detail remedy, the country.
When we say that we have a better body, better physical support, doesn't have to do with the shape or color, complexion, and so forth of the body. It's not about the external appearance, because if we were just to consider the external appearances, then there are other living beings that are much more beautiful than we. When you consider some, for example, some beautiful birds or dogs or what have you, in some sense you can say that some of their appearances is much nicer than our appearances, which can be sometimes quite odd. thinking about the body of human beings is that we have sometimes really weird things happening to us. Hairs are growing where we don't need them, and where you do need hair, you have no hair, right? So our bodies are sometimes reacting in really or developing in a really odd manner.
so ditas diremudos di maimba karsinta ta so di ani kab di yak so share di kar tön yak so shigos na di lo jong la tön kanji nam ju tryen la tön ani yak so keba shigos da yacha geda no di thola ya ani lenyi number ji nam ju tryen tuni di ke tu sa ten di manju lu den chagi yo nguyo ne zures zangin kebar shitu and choba yarab the marab the and kebar shitu and then the in me the kona yibadi receive was that dindri chanta within the sangoreshas.
But jokes aside, when we here say that we have a better body, what we mean is that we have a body that is better able to support a consciousness that can be developed, to be able to distinguish better between what is right and what is wrong, what is correct, what is incorrect, to form the mind to be a kind-hearted mind and to eliminate negative or faulty states of mind. In that sense, we have a better body that supports that ability for mental development. Not only it is a better body, you can say that the ability to develop the mind to that extent, to form the mind to be a kind-hearted, wholesome mind, is something that human beings only can do, whereas in other states of existence, it is not possible to develop the mind to that extent.
Should be any need within the chapters. Need within the chapters and
the topics that are mentioned here in the preliminary sections are points that appear in the presentation of the Lamrim, the steps of the path of enlightenment, beginning with the recognition of the body that we have that has freedoms and richnesses. So there are two sets of things that we look at, two sets of features. To begin with, we look at the freedoms that we have. Now, the word for freedom in Tibetan also has the meaning of having leisure, having the space and time to do it. So what we have leisure, or what we refer to in having leisure, is the leisure to practice the Dharma.
간지 아니 달바 아니 추드바네 컴바 간지 아니 추드 선 마스나 아니 무유 니츠네 랍치 장부치야 아니 시안이야 편도치야디 최고만 데려다서 디드퉁인디 니땡 코노마도 아니 돈들어 써봐 니야바이다 파샤니 아니 한마이니야 가무슈 차르다스니
So then freedoms or leisures, right? We use two words in Tibetan to describe those states, freedoms or leisures. What we mean is that we have the ability to practice the Dharma on the basis of this body. We have the ability to develop an insight into reality, to see what is real, to develop an honest approach to whatever we're doing, including our relationship with others. We have the ability to develop positive states. And that ability is afforded by having the body that we have now that supports the consciousness like we have now. Whereas if we were to be born in other states of existence, like being born as an animal, we would not have that ability, let alone also being born in other states of existence, the health states of existence, or being born as a pregnant and so forth. Also in those states of existence, we'll not have those opportunities, but at least we can see that if we were to be born as an animal, if you consider this possibility, being born as an animal would mean that you will not have the ability to develop your mind to that extent.
There is a kanji and nganzu giant chudi Legni number chia the Basra. Leg which are current, knee which are current, Moyon to Kaibati, Janchi, and Drovina, and Tambu tolerant, draw to it, and 7 maybe tolerant, draw to it. Teacher does not giant should this.
The Dhamma that we take up into our training is a Dhamma that distinguishes between what is negative and what is positive. We train in developing a greater sense of honesty and abstaining from harming others. We train in non-harmfulness. This is the Dhamma that we take up in our training.
This same Shachini, on the giant should indigenous same Shani, that John Bibi, that Karjan was long, and he also that won't be shown to their sober, and Chadang is shown to their sober. And Dindig Zigdi, the Jugulas, Jim tapped the corner model, shoot the corner model, Jen Kang Yang, and Jutumas.
So then thinking of what we are training at, what we're transforming here, we're transforming wicked states of mind, anger, attachment, and so forth. And in order to transform those states of mind, to rid ourselves of those states of mind, the only thing that we can do is to apply the mind to a certain set of training. There is no other way of recovering from anger, attachment, and so forth, other than training our mind.
The Dindig Chuzlu Yahudi and several Lambi and then Karitolia, drug to grace, me within drug to grace, and me within the service. Nanzu Nandia, Kiva Diremoto, Shamba Yomara, Dindig Kiva Yabuchi, Milan Yovana, that D turned the damage Machavana, and not bed and Tapio shoots, Mumba shoots. Charles, but the Tarvik Dandy in some year, you would so indigenous service.
The ability to follow a path for mental training is afforded by having this body of a human being, a human body. And we have attained such body. We have taken a human rebirth. We have taken a good state of rebirth. So if we don't use the ability that we have in this body in making sure that our life will become meaningful on the basis of this body, putting a lot of meaning to freedoms and richnesses, it would mean that we're still completely controlled by confusion.
That then Jorva said, Twingin Jorva said, and Techigorata. Sevachia Twingin Joya, Sigo Mari, Marachia Twingin Joya, Sigo Mari, and a Rangi Shindun Chia Twingin Joya, Sigo Mari, and Chur Duya Twingin Joas. And he Ludi, and me Ludemato, Twindu Denby, Chetu with us, Rushing to Chetu, is a Dinjigi, Tarbat and Jova, Dinjigi, and Louis Caberchin, Ni Yovana, Takarchi is rock.
And then the second word in that, in those features of freedoms and richnesses is richnesses. So richnesses here means that we have richnesses in terms of our conducive conditions. The conditions that we face are conducive, not in terms of developing negative states of mind. It's not that we have more conducive conditions for the development of wicked states of mind, for being more abusive with respect to others, for trying to gain victory over others, even at the expense of the loss or the defeat of others. Those are not the favorable circumstances that we hear talk about. What we mainly refer to is those favorable conditions, richnesses that make it possible for us to develop a positive state of mind, kind-hearted state of mind.
And it Tawad Ye Sungor and George Sungor Kanji, Panjin Dorduna Taharanis. But Dinjig Sambi within the any Kandach in Igris, Nella which Reve, Kalaka which Reve said. Joe get down that Kalaka shoes with us. Kalaka shoes him by the
So we have such freedoms and richnesses, those favorable conditions. Now, is it easy to come by those freedoms and richnesses? Are they easily found, or is it extremely difficult to find freedoms and richnesses? It is hard to find freedoms and richnesses. It is hard to come by freedoms and richnesses because when we think of the causes and conditions that give rise to freedoms and richnesses, we can understand how it's not an easy thing to find, actually. It's extremely difficult. So, good morning to the people that have just joined us. Welcome. Just to say a couple of words about what we're discussing at the moment. So we're looking at a text, a Buddhist text that explains a practice of mind training. And to practice mind training means that we look at the way that we think and we use this particular body that we have now in order to develop a special way of thinking. So we begin with recognizing that we have the potential to do it, particularly where we compare the body that we have now that supports the consciousness that can be developed. We compare it to other states of existence, like, for example, had we been born as an animal, as an insect, or whatever, would we have the same ability, the same possibility for mental development? So this is the section that we're looking at the moment, the one that recognizes that we do have this special circumstance at the moment in which we have a body having freedoms and richnesses that make it possible for us to train our mind in certain ways of thinking. And what we train it, first of all, the recognition that we living in this world, not only human beings, the great number of human beings living in this world, but all living beings, for example, living on this planet, all of us have that basic wish to be happy and to avoid suffering and pain. And we do sometimes speak about certain ideals that we have, like, for example, aspiring and seeking peace in the world and welfare for living beings and so forth. So here in this set of teachings, we recognize that the ways that we can act in order to make that happen, since all living beings are seeking happiness and all living beings want to avoid suffering and pain. We're looking at ways in which we can be of maximum benefit to sentient beings by and large. So here we study the teachings of the Buddha Dharma, which explains what reality is, what is real and what is not real, what is positive and what is negative. And using that, we're seeking to develop a sense of honesty and also the practice of altruism, the practice of non-harmfulness. So we study that, but also we have Dharma discussions here with the Dharma friends. All of those activities are oriented towards developing this kind-hearted state of mind, non-harmfulness, altruism, and a sense of honesty.
안지 먹이 주고 수좀 송어 때니 만탈아야 먹이 주고 수좀 송어 때니 좋은 거야기 누든지 뭐자 잠들이 나와야 소자 샤나마데 잠들이 찍고 송당하니 먹이 주고 수좀 송는 가지고 무슨 가지고 거셔 잡아 또 인용 차거든 이제 딘지 차네 다 개워치만 나야 누든 딘지는 거 좋나 빨라가고 쉬우지 아니 니가고 쉬우지 대샤세.
So anyway, here we recognize the physical support that we have in this life, having a body that has richnesses and freedoms. Not only we recognize that we have those states, but we also recognize how hard it is to find freedoms and richnesses. And there are different ways that we can think of the difficulty in finding freedoms and richnesses. From the point of view of, for example, creating the cause and conditions for freedoms and richnesses, we can understand how difficult it is. So amongst the cause and conditions used for finding freedoms and richnesses, you have the first one, which is, at the very least, guarding ethical discipline, pure ethical discipline, which abstains from the 10 non-virtues. That is the least of the thing, or the bare minimum that you need to do in order to secure a good state of rebirth with freedoms and richnesses. That being the case, if that is the first basic cause that is needed, then thinking of, first of all, our ability to guard ethical discipline, which abstains from the 10 non-virtues. You can say a personal ability to do that, or in general within human society, but not only within human society, also considering other life forms, other living beings, animals, and so forth. How many of us as living beings are really capable, not only capable, but also take it to heart the practice of guarding ethical discipline, which is abstains from the 10 non-virtues? Not many. And since there are not many who can do that or do that, you can understand how difficult it is to find freedoms and richnesses in your next life. When you think at least of this life, you can understand how hard it is to again find after death another state of rebirth that is similar to that.
아니 야피 정된디 추다 주고래야 추는 주고래 아니 뭐다 마소 한슈디 내기적으로 수를 잘 봤어. 그 추고래 슈세는 마소 단지 아니 잠블링 dinamo 깨치니 잠블링 기치 소차 요도 쪼야 세우면 장생 토미 야 가서다 다종 진행기 미지 교회야 미기주 수준이 송고도스라.
The life that we have in this life, the body that we have in this life, has 8 sets of freedoms and 10 richnesses. And they are afforded by having practiced ethical discipline, which abstain from the 10 non-virtues. So in that sense, when you think of the causes that can be created, need to be created for securing freedoms and richnesses, you can say that the best and most important cause is guarding ethical discipline, which is also regarded as the entry gate to the practice of the Buddha Dharma. The doorway for the practice of the Buddha Dharma begins with developing ethics in which you abstain from harming others, from non-virtuous actions, from the 10 non-virtues. And you do that through also the basic principle that is found in the Buddha Dharma, which is the development of a sense of concern for others, loving kindness, a genuine sense of concern, a wish to take care of the welfare of others. If you have them, you can then more easily put into practice the ethical discipline which abstains from the 10 non-virtues. And in thinking of this set of instructions for, first of all, appreciating the freedoms and richnesses that we have here, we can also appreciate the kindness of the Buddha, the teacher, who gave those teachings to us, emphasizing the equality between ourselves and others in seeking happiness and wanting to avoid suffering, and also the sense of equal sense of love and concern that is extended to all through those teachings. So regardless of one's ethnicity or religion or gender, or whether you're rich or poor or whatever life form, the same degree of love and concern is extended to all of to everyone, without a sense of belittling some, looking down on them, disregarding their needs of welfare and so forth. How lucky we are to come across such teachings that promote an ethical behavior which considers the equality of all living beings. So if we think about also the kindness of teachers who taught how to do that, through that we can also receive the blessings of those teachings in our mind. So not only we think of having found this body with freedoms and richnesses, which is very difficult to find, but we also consider how it is of a great advantage. It is of a great meaning. So rather than being totally concerned about what we can get for ourselves only, we can recognize that using the body that we have now, we can secure a greater purpose, a greater advantage for oneself and other living beings. Otherwise, if we don't think of the welfare of others, so we can use the life that we have now with freedoms and richnesses also to not only work for the sake of others, but also for the welfare of other living beings. And we can see that other living beings can take care of themselves to a certain degree. They can obtain food, clothing, shelter, and so forth. So if we also only focus on looking for food, being engaged, being concerned about clothing, shelter, and so forth, there would be not much difference between ourselves and other living beings. But we are different in the sense that we have the ability to secure the maximum benefit for ourselves and other living beings as well.
Tadini send the Hindu Mendeva Chomata Chusamba Seti. Chusamba Seti, right?
So with respect to the text, it says this involves contemplating the significance and rarity of life as a free and fortunate human being. So this is what we briefly spoke of now. Then the second point in the preliminary is contemplating impermanence and death, which leads to the realization that our lives can end at any time, and thinking about the causes and results of actions and the vicious nature of cyclic existence. But before we get to that, we think of death and impermanence, and that we don't have a lot of time left for us in this lifetime.
That the Dhamma Chichagoras, Dhamma Chishi, and it moyo needs to judge. Want to and do with Netan moyo needs to joras. Thetan judging, Muzulia, Dhamma patients. Canada yet, Tawagi, George and and it shouldn't need a bit. And it's Rajini turned to me. You didn't teach that do us. They did told it that can give can't drip to a deep drip us. But deep druya deep can Nigan Shajans with teaching. And it Namian chops down. There can within the and it kind of drip matuli should drag Nigayas. Has not on your charge of shoots. Kitchen your drawings, and come to the ya Chimatuana, short drag Nigayas.
And this reflection on death and impermanence, that we don't have a lot of time left for us in this life, and sooner rather than later we might be on a deathbed, is of the best motivation that you can develop, the best ways of thinking that you can develop in order to drive yourself to put those instructions into practice. So looking at the approach that these teachings present here, those teachings tell us here that, first of all, we do have this special circumstance in having freedoms and richnesses. So our situation is really good. This is the reality of the body. It is difficult to find those freedoms and richnesses. And we can use our freedoms and richnesses in order to be of greater benefits to ourselves and others. So what can be done having found those freedoms and richnesses? What do we need to do when we have found such freedoms and richnesses? If we procrastinate what can be done once you have found those freedoms and richnesses, which allow you to be of greater benefit to yourself and others, if you procrastinate, if you think that I'll do it tomorrow or after, later on, if you ignore, disregard the ability that you have now to practice, at the end, it might be too late and you will lose that opportunity.
Yeah, that the Jigdor said, Mondula, Shenon, Sito, Chicken Casota, Ma Pachayaki, and Gajet Tindi, Chick saw in the Maris, Maros, because we need to talk here sometime. And Monzu Tirin current Tombati, Tirin carry over to talk sometime. And Sunny and Karkar Charmate, saw in the Chamato, Cousin Karkar Yoga, very over the never. Chena Manchia. And vegetarian makers, sometimes makers, and can be used some mother, never champion, Pemmo with us. Can keep to the chicken, and you didn't tell us. Yahu over the task, Nayan Anji, and Chawashimba go for devil, don't chagris.
we think of death and impermanence, and when we think that a body disintegrates from moment to moment, that a body declines from moment to moment, it's not that our goal is to become despondent. It's not that we're developing a state of mind in which we become depressed or despondent about our upcoming death. The purpose is not to lose heart, but it is to recognize that we might possess some things today, but there is no guarantee that they will still be there tomorrow. Looking at things that we had yesterday or before, we can see that so many of them are no longer present. They have declined, they've gone away. So if we then think of the current state that we have now, in which we have a good and functioning body, and we don't make a proper use of it, a good use of this body, and in considering the passage of time and that this body declines and disintegrates, at some point, the ability to make a great and effective use of this body will no longer be there. And if we allow that to happen without making good use of the body, at the end, we will be at fault. So the recognition of death and impermanence is there in order to avoid the fault of not using this body that we have now at the moment and then completely losing that opportunity later on. So here, to begin with, the section explains the type of meditations that you do as preliminary practices, but a greater explanation of them will come up later on. Like, for example, with respect to contemplating impermanence and death, there is a meditation in which you think of the 3 main roots and the 9 reasons that demonstrate to your mind how you're subject to death and impermanence. So we'll look at that later on. Anyway, in the preliminary practices, not only we contemplate the significance of freedoms and richnesses, contemplating impermanence of death, but also we think about the cause and results of actions and the vicious nature of cyclic existence. Here, when Namkapa mentions cause and results, how it begins thinking about the causes and results of actions, what is refers to is thinking about karma, actions and the results. So again, we'll look at that in greater details later on, but we can say for the time being that the greatest summary of the Buddha Dharma is found within karma, actions and the results. And as such, roughly, we can divide it into 2 sections. There are virtuous and non-virtuous actions. So when we speak of karma in Buddhist terminology, we call actions, we refer to actions as being causes which produce results. So karma is a cause, which means an action is a cause, which produces its own respective result. So roughly speaking, positive actions, positive karma, leads to positive results, and negative karma leads to negative results. So if we behave in a negative way, it can only bring about negative results. It will not bring about positive results. And the main factor that determines what is a positive action, what is negative action, is the motivation that we have in the performance of an action. So in that sense, you might be fierce in your behavior with another person, while your behavior might be quite fierce. If your motivation is a positive motivation, it is a positive action. Whereas if you have a negative intention, you might be smiling at another person. But with that negative motivation, smiling at another person would be regarded as a negative action. So Geshe just read through the end of this section. So let's read it here now. So we think of these preliminary points: freedoms and richnesses, death and impermanence, karma, actions and the results, and the vicious nature of cyclic existence. From these basic practices up to the training in the ultimate awakening mind, the practices can be divided into two: the actual meditation session and the periods between meditation session. So we're not going to read more in this session. We're going to leave the text here for now. Thank you very much. So I'll put the dedication prayers on the screen. May the Supreme Jewel Bodhicitta that is not arisen, rise and grow, and may that which is arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha, and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewels, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. Savor of the snow-land teachings and transform greater beings, who makes extremely clear the path of this unification of emptiness and compassion. To the lotus holder Tenzin Gyatso I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And finally, you uphold the subduers moral way, who serve as a bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading my Janast victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels. Several of myself and others, your disciples, please live long. Yeah.
Sí.